We are in A Course in Miracles workbook for students, part 1 of the workbook, lesson 86. These ideas are for review today. Lesson 71. Only God's plan for salvation will work. It is senseless for me to search wildly about for salvation. I have seen it in many people and in many things, but when I reached for it, it was not there. I was mistaken about where it is. I was mistaken about what it is. I will undertake no more idle seeking. Only God's plan for salvation will work, and I will rejoice because His plan can never fail. These are some suggested forms for applying this idea specifically. God's plan for salvation will save me in this. This is no exception in God's plan for my salvation. Let me perceive this only in the light of God's plan for salvation. Lesson 72. Holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Holding grievances is an attempt to prove that God's plan for salvation will not work. Yet only His plan will work. By holding grievances, I am therefore excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness. I would no longer defeat my own best interests in this insane way. I would accept God's plan for salvation and be happy. Specific applications might be in these forms. I am choosing between misperception and salvation as I look on this. If I see grounds for grievances in this, I will not see the grounds for my salvation. This calls for salvation, not attack. I will read Robert Perry and Ellen Watson's review. Lesson 86. Only God's plan for salvation will work. Lesson 71 and Lesson 72, Holding Grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. I find it really interesting how the lessons seem to alternate between seeing grievances and where we look for salvation. I am beginning to get the idea, I think, when my ego wants to keep me from finding God's salvation within my own self, it distracts me with some kind of grievance outside myself. Seeing the cause of my distress outside, I naturally look for the solution outside. I seek salvation outside myself. It's never what is outside that is the problem. Those whom you see as guilty become the witnesses to guilt in you, and you will see it there, for it is there until it is undone. Guilt is always in your mind, which has condemned itself. Project it not, for while you do, it cannot be undone. What we are seeing out there, the object of our grievances, is the only projection of self-condemnation. We may change the name of the sin to protect the guilty, ourselves, but it is our sin we are seeing out in the world. That is why seeing grievances outside keeps us from finding salvation inside. As the review says, we have sought salvation in many different places and things, and it was never where we looked. We can't find it out there because it isn't out there anywhere. There is no hope for salvation in this world, and that is the good news. It's good news because we no longer have to depend on someone or something outside of our outside of ourselves to play its proper role, to arrive at the right time to meet our needs or to do anything. We can let go of expecting someone else to save us, and we can turn to the only thing we can absolutely depend upon, ourselves, our real self. We can let everyone else off the hook. We've been holding them on for our entire lives. We can tell the world, you are no longer responsible for me. I no longer hold you accountable for my unhappiness. I've realized that this is my own job, not yours. I remember how odd I felt, but how happy to tell my dear friend Lynn years ago, I've realized that I don't need you. She was delighted, being far wiser than I was at the time. I was afraid she would be insulted. How unromantic a thing to say to a partner in love. I don't need you. She understood exactly what I meant. I was telling her that she was no longer expected to make me happy. She was no longer saddled with the unbearable burden of my happiness. Thinking that our love partner is responsible for our happiness is exactly what makes special relationships into hell. Because when I am not happy, I have a grievance, just like in a labor union. Hey, you're not living up to your part in the bargain. You're supposed to make me happy. And the grievance against our partner keeps us from seeing the salvation in our own hearts. I've always liked the last line in today's lesson. This calls for salvation, not attack. It reminds me of the old line in the ancient Superman TV series, the one with George Reeves. Guess I'm really dating myself here. Kent Clark looks at some crime or disaster in progress and says, "This is a job for Superman." Instead of looking at the events in our lives and thinking, this is a job for the ego, let's attack, let's form and hold a grievance, we can look at the situation and say, this is a job for God. Let's forgive. Let's respond with love to the call for love. When some need arises around me, which power will I call on, God or the ego? The choice is between misperception and salvation. The only alternative to salvation is something unreal, an illusion, a misperception. The only way I can avoid being happy is to misperceive my brother. If I see him or her truly, I will always find salvation. By holding grievances, I am therefore excluding my only hope of salvation from my awareness. What a silly thing to do. I think I'll stop. I would accept God's plan for salvation and be happy. Lesson 86, review of Lesson 71, only God's plan for salvation will work. And Lesson 72, holding grievances is an attack on God's plan for salvation. Thank you for joining with me. I love you.